It's been a great season for the North East sides so far. Newcastle playing the Champions League, Sunderland cementing themselves in the Premier League. It feels for another year, and Middlesbrough performing well in the Championship. Could we see all three clubs back in the Premier League for the first time in 12 years? I talked to Craig Johns from Teesside Live about this one. Is the resurgence of North East clubs a temporary moment or the beginning of a sustained football revival?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, hopefully it is, something that's going to be a long-term thing. Obviously, you're going back to 2009, the last time that all three of the big North East clubs were in the Premier League. It is a long time, and it says a lot about the current state of the game. Obviously, Sunderland had to go down as far as League One before they could rebuild and get themselves back where they are in the Premier League. And for Borough, it's been 9 years now since they were relegated last, and it's been tough for them in that 9 years. They probably didn't use the parachute payments as wisely as what many other teams have done in recent years, and then COVID hit, and that really hit Middlesbrough hard as a football club because of the mistakes that had been made when they did have parachute payments, ultimately signing players for a lot of money on big wages who weren't up to it, who weren't good enough. So I think it was in 2021 that they hired Kieran Scott as the head of football, another fancy name for a director of football essentially, and he's kind of slowly but surely been rebuilding Middlesbrough into a football club that recruit well, recruit sensibly, and recruit in a way that also allows them to be better off the pitch financially as well, and that is a big part of Middlesbrough's rebuild. And I think similar story at Sunderland as well. I mean, the story that they had last season, and earning promotion in the way that they did, it's quite remarkable, really. And hopefully, I mean, it's tough. Sunderland have been absolutely brilliant this season to have gone up, and then look like they're going to stay up as well. Middlesbrough do get up. The big task is going to be staying up, of course it is, but hopefully this can be the start of a new kind of golden period for North East football, with of course Newcastle will want to spearhead that with obviously the ownership and the backing from their ownership that they have.
Yeah. On the back end of obviously the ownership, how much has the transformation of Newcastle sort of changed the expectation for other North East clubs?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if it has as such at Middlesbrough, really. I think I think unfortunately there's a realism really at Middlesbrough that when you get a state like Saudi Arabia back in Newcastle United, then financially the reality is that Middlesbrough are just not going to be able to compete with that, and that's the reality. I mean, Middlesbrough have been having that reality not with necessarily a state funded club, but in the Championship it's obviously so skewed because of parachute payments from Premier League. So every season you have three clubs coming down who have such a huge financial advantage over you, and this was a big factor behind Middlesbrough bringing in Kieran Scott when they did, and obviously the players they sign are with potential future sales for big profits in mind. So for example, we saw recently the accounts for last season came out, and that showed that Middlesbrough lost £11 million, which in the Championship it sounds ridiculous to say, but wasn't actually too bad a financial result. Now, the big thing of that was that they made 26 million, I think, off the top of my head, in player sale profits, and that completely reduced the losses because and that kind of highlights just how difficult the Championship is in terms of competing and having a squad capable of competing. I mean, that squad and that £11 million loss was only capable of finishing 10th in the Championship, so it gives you a good idea of kind of how difficult it is for Middlesbrough in that position to compete when clubs like come down for the Premier League with parachute payments, and linking that back to the original question in Newcastle, I think I don't think what Newcastle now have has really changed any expectations for Middlesbrough. It's Middlesbrough, there's a realism that they don't have that, and unfortunately not everyone can be owned by a rich state, and therefore you've got to kind of punch with your weight and do as much as you can with what you do have, and obviously what Middlesbrough do have is a fantastic benevolent owner in Steve Gibson, who is a bit of a dying breed in the modern game, really. Someone who is a genuine Middlesbrough lad and absolutely loves the club, and is desperate to return it to its former glories.
Do you feel like, obviously, the support is such a passionate and loyal fan base? I think that really is like a big factor for the clubs.
Yeah, 100%. I think, of a certain players will look at that, and it will attract them. I think to North East clubs. I know there's always been the debate about, is it attractive to come and play in the North East because of the area, because of the region, and will big players want to do that? But yeah. I think certain players will be attracted by the fact that the fans are like they are, whether it's Newcastle, Sunderland, Middlesbrough. The passion for those football clubs is massive. At Middlesbrough, we had Tommy Conway talking about that just recently, actually, and he left Bristol City at the start of last season to come to Middlesbrough, and Bristol City have been there or thereabouts for a number of years themselves, kind of trying to push into promotion contention in the Championship, but. Not only did Tommy Conway feel like Middlesbrough was a kind of better prospect for making his Premier League dream a reality, he was drawn, he said, by the supporters, by the passionate fans, and wanting to play for fans who ultimately drive you in the way that Middlesbrough fans can, and similar with Newcastle and Sunderland. So I think, without a doubt, if anybody sees interest from any of the three clubs and does, even if they're not already aware of it, if they do a bit of research, I can only imagine that is a really attractive thing to come and play for a football club with such passionate supporters.
Yeah. Looking back at the highs and lows of the clubs over the past few decades, what do you think lessons have sort of shaped them to be how they're run today?
Yes, I think it's difficult for me to speak too much about Newcastle. I haven't been too much involved in that. Sunderland I covered for a short space of time.
Yeah.
But it was during a time where it was all decline for Sunderland, and I think the lessons really there with that short-termism doesn't get you anywhere in the long run. I started covering Sunderland in 2014 and left just before the second season. Midway through the second season in League One.
Okay.
And so what I saw when covering Sunderland initially under Ellis Short was that there was a club there that was so desperate to stay in the Premier League that they didn't really have any long-term thinking, long-term plans. It was just season after season. The only ambition is to stay in the Premier League, and what that meant was you'd get February, March every season, and the latest manager would be sacked and a new one would be coming. You'd get that initial new manager bounce, that'd stay in the Premier League, that'd sign completely new players for this new manager, and then the same cycle would repeat for a good 3 or 4 seasons, until when David Moyes eventually arrived in 2016, it was a complete mess. The finances of the club were a complete mess. Ellis Short had decided he wasn't going to fund the club in the same way anymore. And there was a squad there that was just totally unbalanced. It was, a squad made up of players who were brought in for about 3 or 4 different managers with no kind of style or thread or anything going through the squad. And in more recent years, watching more from afar, Sunderland, that's been the big improvement and the big thing that's ultimately got them from League One back to the Premier League.
Yeah.
I think in Christian Speakman they hired a person similar to Kieran Scott here at Middlesbrough who, said this is Sunderland. These are the type of players we're going to recruit. Whoever the head coach is going to want to work with these type of players because they're gonna. The head coach we recruit will suit the style of players we have at this club, and will continue to recruit a certain style of player. In Sunderland's case, it was very much a kind of youthful thread that they went down, and it's worked really well for them, and they've obviously got themselves back to the Premier League. And it's a similar thing at Middlesbrough, where again they had a number of years where they probably wasted parachute payments. We're kind of going back and forth on whether they wanted, certainly when they came down from the Premier League 9 years ago, it was Gary Monk in charge who wanted to play a kind of position-based style football, but then within 6 months he was gone and Tony Pulis was in. He had 2 years, he was gone. Woodgate come in and he wanted to play possession football. He went, Warner came in, that was more like Pulis' style, more direct. And again, it leads to the same kind of problems where there's no kind of thread, there's no consistency, and there's players recruited for different styles of football who then people have to come in and try and make something of. Whereas once Kieran Scott was in place, it took him a couple of years. He had to balance things carefully with money in mind, etc. But he's starting now to build a Middlesbrough squad which is in the image of what Middlesbrough want their squad to be and the type of players they want to be. So I think that's the big thing, the big learning really, and going back to the financial side of it, there has to be a kind of, it's no good paying a lot of money and signing a load of 28 to 32-year-old players who ultimately have no resale value.
Yeah.
Eventually they get past their peak years, no one wants to sign them, and the clubs in the Championship are not running on day-to-day profits. Every Championship club other than parachute payment clubs are running on day-to-day losses, so you have to make up them losses in some way. Those losses are on player sales, as I said, with Middlesbrough's finances. So, to ultimately to carry a squad where you're able to compete in the Championship, you need factor in player sales. Player trading is massive. So I think that's been the big learning point for Middlesbrough really, is they needed more kind of long-term thinking and longer-term planning rather than being so short-termism and thinking, season to season.
Yeah. Do you think we could realistically see all three North East clubs in the Premier League next season?
I really hope so. I mean, Middlesbrough are doing everything in their power to make it as stressful as possible. But I mean, they've got a brilliant chance. They're sitting second in the league with 8 games to go. There's a couple of difficult games to come up. They've still got to go to Ipswich. They've got Millwall coming to the Riverside in a couple of weeks' time. It's going to be tough. It's going to be an interesting battle. Ipswich, of course, one of those clubs with parachute payments, and therefore able to have an unbelievable group of players who probably should be achieving a lot more than they are this season. So it's not going to be easy, but if Middlesbrough can sort the goal scoring troubles that they've had, particularly on home turf in recent games, then I'd put them as favourites to go on and win promotion this season, because I think out of all the teams competing for promotion, they certainly play the best football.
Yeah, definitely. Do you feel like when Middlesbrough go up next season, they'll think they'll try and follow maybe something similar to what Sunderland have done, or do you think they'll try their own system when they get promoted?
Yeah, this is going to be a really interesting thing. It'll be something that we'll have to press the club on in kind of the coming months if they manage to get there, because in many ways Sunderland is an interesting model to follow. And I think if you look at one of the other teams who've not so much this season but in recent years gone up and managed to stay up when so many ultimately come straight back down, the other I would think of as Nottingham Forest.
Yeah.
Both did very similar things in that they were quite ruthless in just completely overhauling their Championship team. The gulf in class between Premier League and Championship is ultimately massive, and when you look at Sunderland, yes, there are still a few players who were part of that Championship promotion winning team, but so many more have been recruited and brought in for it, and ultimately I think that's the way Middlesbrough will probably have to go when you're looking at their squad now. That there are certain players you could pick out, the obvious one being Hayden Hackney, or if they get up, you feel they are Premier League ready and they can do a job.
Yeah.
But they're undoubtedly going to have to look at many positions in that team and try and strengthen if they are to have realistic prospects of staying in the Premier League. The difficulty will be is that obviously the financial aspect of that. Yes, you get so much more revenue from the broadcast deal in the Premier League, but the cost of them bringing in new players, the wages in the Premier League and all of that thing goes up so much as well, so that it's a bit of a fallacy that it's so financially lucrative to go up to the Premier League, because actually you have to spend so much more to stay there, particularly when you're going up from the Championship and you've got a lot of improvement to do, which Middlesbrough will have. And the thing that Sunderland did so well, I think their accounts came out just this week, and I think did they lose about £1 million last year? Which, for a Championship team, that's absolutely unheard of. That's some going to go and win promotion based on that. But what that did is it left them loads of leeway in terms of spending. When they did go up, they could spend so much more as they had that extra leeway. Middlesbrough won't have that. Middlesbrough have posted losses of plus 10 million for the last however many years, certainly since COVID. So they're going to have a tighter budget to work with if they do get up. But that's where people like Kieran Scott and the recruitment team working behind him, the scouts and whatnot, they're going to have to try and find the right players at the right price in order to strengthen the Middlesbrough squad, because I certainly think that to have a realistic chance of surviving next season in the Premier League, should they get there, they will have to inevitably strengthen in a number of key positions.